The message came in at 11:51 on a Tuesday night. I was still at my desk. That's not unusual for me. I keep late hours, always have, mostly because the quiet after 10 o'clock is when I actually get my best thinking done. The city outside my Chicago apartment had settled into that particular nighttime hum, the kind that feels almost companionable when you've lived alone long enough. I had a half-empty mug of tea going cold beside my keyboard and a vendor contract open on my second monitor. Normal night. Ordinary Tuesday. Then my phone lit up with Serafina's name. I should have felt something, a flicker of warmth. Maybe. Or at least the low-grade anticipation you feel when someone you love reaches out unexpectedly. Instead, I felt a kind of stillness. The kind your body goes to when it already knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. I opened the message. Lennox, the guest list is finalized. Tristan's family moves in very specific social circles. And we want the day to feel seamless. I think it's better if you stay in Chicago. You understand, don't you? Love you. I read it once. Then I read it again. Slowly. Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading the tone. I wasn't. The message was careful in the way that only deliberate messages are careful. Every word chosen. Nothing accidental. You understand, don't you? Not a question. An instruction wearing the clothes of a question. I set the phone down and looked out the window for a while. I didn't cry. That's not a point of pride. I just didn't. Because what I felt wasn't exactly sadness. It was something more like recognition. The specific ache of something you suspected for a long time finally being confirmed. After a few minutes, I picked the phone back up and typed, I understand. Take care of yourselves. I sent it. Then I finished my tea, even though it had gone cold. Because wasting a full mug felt like one unnecessary loss on top of another. I need to give you some background. Because this story doesn't make sense without it. My name is Lennox Whitmore. I'm 31 years old. I run a crisis management firm out of Chicago. A real one. Not the kind that just does social media cleanup and calls it reputation management. I handle genuine emergencies. Political scandals. Corporate breaches. Public figures whose private lives have become public problems. When a situation has already caught fire and the only question is how much of it burns down. People call me. I'm good at it. I'm good at it because I learned early, very early, that staying calm when everything around you is falling apart is one of the most valuable skills a person can have. I learned it at home. My mother, Genevieve, is a complicated woman. I say that without malice. She genuinely is complicated. And I think her life dealt her some things she wasn't equipped to handle. And she handled them the only way she knew how, which was to keep reaching for the next thing that might fix everything. The right address. The right connections. The right marriage for her younger daughter. She wasn't cruel. Exactly. She was just always angled toward the future in a way that made it hard for her to look directly at the present, or at the people standing in it. Serafina was always the one she looked at, though. Serafina is 4 years younger than me, and from the time we were small, she had something I didn't ease with people. A kind of natural brightness that made rooms feel warmer when she walked in. I don't say that bitterly. It was true. She was genuinely lovely, and I genuinely loved her. And for most of our childhood, those two things coexisted without much friction. The friction came later. It came when Serafina started making choices that threatened to undo everything. And someone had to quietly make those choices disappear. And that someone was always me. The first time, she was 22. There was an incident involving a car, a parking lot, and a blood alcohol level that had no business being behind a wheel. It didn't make the news. It didn't make the news because I knew someone who knew someone, and I spent 3 weeks and more money than I want to say making sure it stayed quiet. Serafina thanked me. My mother thanked me. And then we all moved on as though it hadn't happened, which is the Whitmore family's preferred method of processing difficulty. The second time was a relationship, a man who had a wife, as it turned out, and a lawyer who was very interested in making that fact very public. I handled it. Again. I spent money I didn't entirely have, called in favors I'd been carefully accumulating, and contained the damage before it spread. Each time, I told myself I was doing it because I loved her. That was true, but I also think, looking back now, with the honesty that distance allows, that I had made myself indispensable in a way that felt like love, but also functioned like control. Not over her, over the situation. Over the outcome. I couldn't fix the parts of my family that hurt, but I could fix the consequences. I could be useful. And being useful felt, for a long time, like belonging. When Serafina met Tristan Calloway, everything accelerated. Tristan was the youngest son of Senator Graham Calloway, and the Calloway family was the kind of old-money political dynasty that expects its members' lives to be without blemish, which meant that Serafina, with her history, needed considerable management before she could step into that world without incident. She asked me to help. I said yes. I became, For all practical purposes, the invisible infrastructure of the next 3 years of her life. I built her a new public image, softening her edges, amplifying her genuine warmth, making sure every charitable appearance and every press mention added to a portrait of the kind of woman the senator's family could welcome. I spent $50,000 of my own commission money to secure the Bitterroot Valley estate in Montana for the wedding, because it was the venue Serafina wanted and she needed someone to guarantee the contract immediately. I managed the vendors, the communications, the logistics. I was the one who knew every moving part of that wedding, because I had built every moving part of that wedding. That's the context. That's what the text at 11:51 p.m. was dismissing. The morning after, I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I worked. I opened the iCloud sync I'd configured on Serafina's planning tablet. I want to be straightforward about this. It was a boundary I crossed. I had set it up originally to manage vendor communications more efficiently, to make sure nothing fell through the cracks on my end. But reading her personal messages was something else. I knew it was something else. I did it anyway. And I'm not going to dress that up as purely professional. What I found on that screen changed the shape of the day. Serafina was in contact with Daniel, an ex-boyfriend the family had always considered a mistake. Not because he was a bad person, but because he was a distraction. The kind of relationship that made her reckless and loose in ways I'd spent years carefully corralling. The messages I was reading weren't ambiguous. They were warm in the particular way of two people resuming something that never properly ended. She was asking him to come to the estate. Not after the wedding. Not next month, the afternoon of the ceremony. She wanted him to meet her in the private ready room in the hour before she walked down the aisle. I put my phone face down on the desk and sat very still for a while. I want to be accurate about what I felt, because I think the accurate version is more honest than the clean one. I felt a kind of sadness that's hard to describe, the sadness of watching someone you love make a decision that will hurt them, and understanding that this time you don't have the energy to stop it. I also felt something smaller and less flattering. The awareness that she was about to blow up a wedding I had spent 3 years, and a significant portion of my savings building, and that she had sent me a message the night before telling me I wasn't good enough to attend it. Those two feelings sat in me at the same time. I didn't try to separate them. I called the head of the catering firm that morning. I told him there was a suspected gas leak at the Bitterroot property, and that for safety reasons I was redirecting all services to a secondary location. That was a lie. I'm stating that plainly because I think you deserve the plain version. It worked, because I was the person holding the contracts. Vendors follow the authority figure in any logistical chain, and I had made myself that figure. By midday, the food, the wine, and a significant portion of the service staff had been rerouted to a private charter I'd arranged on the lake. I also made a call to a journalist I'd worked with before. A political correspondent, careful, experienced, the kind of person who doesn't need much to start moving in the direction of a story. I didn't fabricate anything. I told him where to be and when, and I told him what I believed he would find there. He understood. He was there by 3. I'm not offering excuses for either of those decisions. They were choices made by a person who was tired and hurt and had, finally, stopped trying to hold everything together for people who hadn't noticed how much holding it took. There are things I want to explain about the legal structure, because I've heard people tell this story in a way that makes it sound more orchestrated than it was. The Calloway family's attorneys had drafted a detailed pre-nuptial agreement. The senator's people were thorough in the way of families who have protected inherited wealth for generations. Buried within it was an infidelity and reputation clause. If the marriage was dissolved before or immediately following the ceremony due to documented misconduct by the bride, financial liability for all wedding-related costs reverted to the primary guarantor of the estate contract. That person was my mother. Genevieve had countersigned the venue guarantee months earlier, partly because Serafina's credit didn't qualify for the contract alone, and partly because my mother wanted her name on the document. She wanted to be part of it. I had flagged the clause to her at the time. Not as a warning, exactly more as a note. She waved it off. She said the senator's family was gracious, that it was a formality, that nothing was going to go wrong. I didn't push. I did not create that clause. I did not engineer my mother's involvement. What I did, and I'll be honest about this, was choose not to warn either of them that morning. I knew what was in those messages. I knew what that clause said. I let the day move forward without intervening. That's the thing I sit with the most. When I sit with this story. Not the rerouted caterers or the journalist or any of the more dramatic pieces. Just that choice. To know, and to say nothing. I'm not sure whether it was self-protection or something harder to justify. Maybe both. Most things are both. By 3 in the afternoon, the Bitterroot estate had gone quiet, in the particular way that large places go quiet, when what was supposed to fill them doesn't arrive. The guest tables were bare. The service staff was gone. The guests moved through the rooms with the strained politeness of people trying to interpret an absence. The senator's family, accustomed to events running exactly as planned, had the particular stillness of people who were very angry and not yet showing it. Tristan found out the way most people find out things now, through his phone. A link forwarded from someone in his circle. A story already in motion before he had any ability to shape it. I watched some of it through the estate's security feed on my laptop. Though I want to be honest about the fact that watching felt wrong even as I did it. There's something uncomfortable about observing a moment of genuine devastation from a distance, even when you're the reason for it. He was composed. He was the kind of composed that comes from being raised in public life, where the first instinct in a difficult moment is to control your face. He spoke briefly to the gathered guests in the empty chapel that the wedding would not proceed, that he was sorry for their time, that his family would be in touch. And then he walked out. The Callaway legal team moved quickly. By that evening, formal proceedings had been initiated under the terms of the agreement. The clause was invoked. My mother's name was on every document. She called me many times that evening. When I finally answered, the voice on the other end wasn't the one that had sent me the text about fitting the brand. It was the voice of a woman who was frightened in a way that made her sound, for a moment, much younger. She was crying in the jagged, breathless way of someone who has been crying for hours and can't stop. She asked me to fix it. She said she knew I could fix it. That I always fixed it. That this was what I was good at. That she needed me. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked out at the water. "I can't fix this one, Mom," I said. She asked me why. She said things I understood were born from panic rather than conviction, that I was cold, that I didn't care about my family, that I had done this to them on purpose. I let her say them. Some of it landed. Some of it didn't. "I love you," I told her. And I meant it. I'm not going to be able to help this time. I don't know if she believed the first part. I stayed on the line for another few minutes without saying much more. And then we said goodbye and I hung up. And I sat in the quiet of that Saturday night and felt neither triumphant nor entirely at ease. More than anything, I felt tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been bracing for something for a very long time and has finally, for better or worse, stopped. The months after were quieter than I expected. My mother bore the legal liability under the terms she had agreed to. The family home in Chicago, which had been leveraged against various debts over the years, was repossessed by the bank. This was not the first time the house had been close to that edge. I had prevented it twice before, quietly, with my own money. This time I didn't step in. I want to be clear that this cost me something. It still costs me something. On the days when I let myself think about it, that house had a particular smell in the mornings, old wood and coffee and something I could never identify, and I grew up in it, and it's gone now because of a sequence of events I was part of setting in motion. I don't know how to carry that in a way that makes it simple. I just carry it. Serafina moved. I don't know exactly where. We haven't spoken. I've started messages to her more than once and not sent them. Which probably tells you something about where I am with it not closed, but not ready either. My life now is quieter and, in most of the ways that matter, genuinely better. I moved into an office with good light and a window that faces the lake. I took on new clients, real work, the kind I'm built for. I have a small number of people around me who know me outside of a professional context. My lead investigator, Marcus, who has been with me since the early days and has the particular gift of telling me the truth without making it feel like a verdict. An older mentor in New York named Patricia, who I call when I need someone to ask me the right uncomfortable question. 2 or 3 friends from the years when I had nothing and was figuring everything out in real time, who never needed me to be impressive. They see me as a person. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. Here is what I know, after all of it. I spent a long time being useful to people who loved me more for what I did than for who I was. That's partly on them, and partly on me. I made myself into a function, and functions are easy to take for granted. I stayed longer than I should have because I confused being needed with being loved, and because leaving felt like failure, and because some part of me kept believing that if I did enough, the equation would eventually balance. It doesn't work that way. I know that now. I don't think I handled everything in this story well. There are choices I made that I'd make differently if I could, not the choice to finally stop absorbing everything, but some of the specific ways I stopped. I caused real harm to real people, including people I love. That's true even when those people had also caused harm to me. Both things are true, and they don't cancel each other out. What I've found, on the other side of all of it, is something quieter than happiness but more durable, a kind of steadiness I don't think I've ever had before. My apartment is calm. My work is good. The people in my life see me clearly, and still choose to be there. Some mornings I sit with my coffee and watch the light change over the lake, and I think about my mother and my sister. And I feel something I can only describe as a kind of open sadness, not the heavy, suffocating kind, but the lighter kind. The kind that lives alongside everything else without taking over. I hope they're okay. I mean that without any subtext. I'm not the person I was 3 years ago. or even 1 year ago. I'm still finding out who I am outside of being useful to everyone else. And that's a process that takes longer than you'd expect. But I'm here. And I'm learning. And the life I'm living is mine, in a way it never quite was before. That's the whole story. Or at least, the part I know how to tell right now. My name is Lennox. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.